Hello, I'm Bob Childs. I'm here to talk about the evolution of the Information Resources Management College. I'd like to share my knowledge, my experiences, and let you know a little bit about the what, the who, the how, and the why of how this college was developed. I want to give you the foundational elements for why it was formed and how it evolved to what it is today. In 1965, the Department of Defense Computer Institute was formed. In 1976, the National Defense University was formed by the Clements Committee on Excellence in Education. The Clements Committee looked at the senior service schools because there was a concern that there was duplication of effort. NDU was formed from the Industrial College of the Armed Forces and the National War College. The idea was to put those schools together under an umbrella of a university so you could share resources, funding, acquisition of goods and services, and HR functions. So once again, NDU was formed in 1976. In 1981, John Pustage, who was then the president of the university, brought the Joint Forces Staff College from Norfolk under the umbrella of NDU. In 1982, he brought the Department of Defense Computer Institute under NDU. At this time, the purpose of DODC was to basically teach fundamentals of the use of computers. It was a technically oriented school at the basic level. DoD was just becoming into the realm of where they would discover the use of computers and their advantages. Plus, they had the crazy vision that someday senior leaders will need to know how to use computers and computers will be central to all operations. What a strange vision, huh? In 1988, the DoD comptroller, Mr. Helms, worked with NDU and decided that they needed to look at DODC and it should become something else. At this time, there was a lot of things going on and a lot of money was starting to go into automated information systems and the management of information and information technology. In 1989, the deputy controller for DoD, Cindy Kindle, made it happen. Working with NDU, they put out a directive that basically said we need to upgrade, reorient, rename, and relocate the DODC Institute. And there are a number of things that the institution will do. It will offer courses to other schools at the National Defense University. It will provide education to senior executives with IRM responsibilities. It will offer courses to program managers, automated information system managers and their staffs, and it will provide technical assistance to all DoD organizations. John Carabella, a career SES who was well known in the Pentagon and a personal friend of Cindy Kindle, was put in charge of this monumental task. John was well known in DoD. He was a tough operator. He knew where to go and how to get things done. In 1991, John brought me in to run the academic side of the operation. So he was Mr. Outside and I was Mr. Inside. I had a number of experiences that were appropriate. OSD policy experience, accrediting experience, work with the Community College of the Air Force and degree granting, and a number of other experiences that will play later in our narrative. Now, a key person from the very beginning, going back to 1988, was Danita McGarry. Danita was the Deputy Dean of Faculty and Academic Programs. Danita really understood the curriculum that DODC was currently offering and she understood where it had to go. This was very important to the operation later. There were 4 tasks that were set out, as I mentioned at the beginning. The first one was to upgrade the faculty. We had 3 PhDs, and we were supposed to put a faculty together that had a minimum of master's degrees and as many PhDs as we could get. That number would grow to 25 or more. We need to retain the people that had the correct background, and we need to bring in new people. We also had a process where we took current faculty members and paid them to get into PhD programs. Bob Nielsen, Dwight Taves, and Marwan Jamal were 3 of the individuals that went through this program and obtained their degrees, their PhDs, under the auspices of this directive. We hired a number of people. These people were referred to as dirty boots faculty members. And Wired Magazine picked up on this, and they interviewed me, and they said, "What does this mean?" And I said, "That means we want to hire people that have the experience. We don't want people who are nestled away in institutions of higher education. We want people that have been out, that have gotten their hands dirty, their feet dirty. They know it. They have the academic experience, but they also have the practical experience." So that was the term dirty boots faculty. We also were sending our faculty out in the technical mission of assisting DoD organizations, and they were bringing back ideas to us that would play a big role in how we developed the curriculum and what areas we went into. We also, at this time, wanted to work on our philosophy and put our philosophy together. And we wanted to do things, we wanted to motivate and inspire the faculty to do things. And we wanted to bring in a variety of people. This is back in the early 90s. So the first group that I asked to come in were Alvin and Heidi Toffler. The Tofflers had just written 3 books. Well, over time they'd written 3 books. First being Future Shock. Then the next one was The Third Wave, and then Power Shift, and then ultimately they did one which we were mentioned in called War and Anti-War, which would lead to information operations and be key to some of our future development. At the same time, the Gulf War was going on, and information was now being seen as not only knowledge, but the knowledge and information could be turned into power. We also brought in Larry Ellison in the early days, and Larry Ellison was just, Oracle, his company, was just becoming really big, and he focused on commercial off-the-shelf systems and technologies. We brought in Vince Cerf, who was known as one of the fathers of the internet, and later he worked with Google and helped establish them and where they were headed. We brought in Jerry Meckling of the JFK Kennedy School. Jerry taught us a number of things. He was working on re-engineering and the use of the World Wide Web. But one of the things we took for him is get top speakers. You need to bring in top speakers. And this later led us to bring in the CIOs from the service, military leaders that were operating in the field. So we were getting a combination of policy people and practitioners in the field as we put our curriculum together. I will mention some other things, but now I want to get back to curriculum development. One of the first things we had to do with the Department of Defense is dodge the organization. The problem there was there were a lot of silos. We had departments and faculty that did their thing, but they didn't know what the person next to them was doing. So what we needed to do was somehow break those silos and bring it together. And that came about through curriculum reviews called hot washes. And once again, Danita McGarry led this effort. You'll find that Danita is a key player in a number of the things that were transformational The curriculum hot washes were absolutely critical to sorting out the courses, leaving in what was appropriate, and adding the background, the policies, the strategies into those courses, basically elevating the courses. And that was very, very important to us. And Danita and Marcia O'Connor, who was head of the evaluation, did this hundreds of times. We would offer a course one week, and we might offer that course again a month later, and the course would be different because we were upgrading it. Unlike National War College and the Industrial College, who were on 1 year cycles, if they taught something in the fall, they had 10 or 11 months to change that curriculum and upgrade it. We did not have that time lag to be able to do that. The next thing of importance that we did in this area is, once again, under Danita McGarry's leadership, was American Council on Education academic credit. I had worked with the American Council on Education in 1989-90. I was a fellow learning how to be a university or a college president at the time. And what happened is I was familiar with this system, and I had actually watched it and been in charge of it when they came in and looked at the National War College and the Industrial College. And those schools, for their 10-month program, were offered 9 to 15 hours of graduate credit, which would be transferable to other institutions. We had them come in and look at our 16-week program. And it was a paper exercise. It was looking at curriculum, your objectives, your performance objectives, your outcomes. And once again, Danita led the effort with Marcia's help. And they laid out our 16-week program. And after the evaluation was done by a highly qualified team from a number of PhD granting institutions like MIT and Penn State and others, they came up and offered us 19 to 23 credit hours of graduate transfer. We thought to ourselves, wow, we're on the right track for this. It was incredibly important because it was a validation of all the hard work that Danita and Marcia had done in putting our courses together and getting the curriculum reoriented to a higher level. And this was the confirmation that we needed. The next thing that happened, as I mentioned, I had gone to the London School of Economics because it was one of the highest rated institutions of higher learning in Europe. And I wanted to hear what they had to say in this area. And the first thing I had to do is give them a presentation on what we were doing and what we were trying to do. And after my presentation, the head of their institution turned to me, and I'll never forget this. He said, "Bob, right now, you are doing exactly what we hope to do in the future." And I sat back and I was awed by the fact that once again, here's confirmation of what we're doing and how we're doing it. At the same time, we made a visit to the Royal Defense College. Dan Keel was with me, and Dan was later to run our information operations and our information concentrators program. And we went to the Royal Defense College, which was the elite military school in Europe. And Dan gave a presentation, and I met with the senior leadership, and we discussed the difference between electronic warfare and information warfare. The difference being electronic warfare supported military maneuver and operations. Information warfare was driven by information. It drove your strategy. That was so critical to what was going on. The next thing that we did is we had an offsite. And this offsite, a faculty offsite in 1992. And it was very critical because the faculty had originally asked me, are we an IT school or are we an acquisition school? And after 6 months, my answer was, yeah, I think we're both. Well, anyway, at this offsite, it became known as the Navigational North Star for the college because we outlined what we wanted to do. And when I say we outlined, I asked questions and the faculty answered. The faculty was now in charge. We'd hired experts, and I wanted them telling me what ought to go into the curriculum and what programs we ought to have. Well, anyway, we did have some things that I put in that I required that we focus on. One is be a distinctive institution. Number two, focus on the customer. Number three, secure and sustain the allegiance of your communities. In our case, DoD, and we expanded that to the federal community. And later, we included the private sector and international sectors also as kind of adjuncts or supplements to our core. And the last thing is gain recognition. Gain recognition for your people, your expertise, and your programs. We were later going to add a fifth, which is partner, because partners could help you learn, partners could add to your expertise. So we're doing all these things. And then in 1993, there was a huge occurrence. General Surgeon came in as the president of NDU, and he was concerned about the Gulf War and lessons learned, and he loved everything that we were doing in teaching about systems acquisition, about information technology, the labs that we were developing. And he asked us to put together what became known as the School of Information Warfare and Strategy. It was the first 10-month senior service school that had come along in decades. Bob Nielsen, Dr. Bob Nielsen, who had gotten his PhD under our earlier program, led this effort. And he set up a room, and literally we came in and different faculty members would see where their curriculum might fit in, and we had huge scheduling boards that we put little things on, like, okay, here's an hour and a half of crisis management. Here's an hour of enterprise architecture. And we combined all these things, and information operations was a big, big part of this. So that's how the school came about, but it was very interesting. We had 16 students the first year. The second year, the program was expanded to 32 students. The extra 16 students were not military, they were civilians coming in from the interagency. The program was transferred to the Institute of National Strategic Studies. Now, I have to tell you a little story here. General Surgeon asked me to get permission from the personnel chiefs of all three services to conduct this program as a pilot. Well, I went to the Pentagon. I worked with these people at the 3-star level. And the agreement came that, yes, we could have a few students from the other senior service colleges to run this program. But after 2 years, the pilot program was over. Well, personally, I had no trouble with this. Surgeon wanted a 10-month program that would go on forever and keep getting bigger and bigger, which was a great idea. But I was concerned about the students at National War College, the Industrial College, the other service schools, and the 85% of the other officers that never went to senior service school. How would they pick up on this concept of information warfare? So what we did for NDU, we created the Information Strategic Concept Program. And Dan Keel was the key person. Like I told you, Dan went over to the London School of Economics with me, and Dan was by nature and by career a historian. And he really knew backgrounds, histories of war, and things like that. And he put this program together, and he did a super job. What it did, it combined our students taking electives that Dan put together on information operations, information warfare, and different aspects of those two elements. And these students were national and ICAF students, but they took our electives. Then they would go on, they had a 3-week field study program, and they would, they went to different countries. The world was changing, and information technology was becoming the driver. John Chambers, the CEO of Cisco, stated, IT is moving from the back room to the boardroom. He said, I used to meet with IT executives in the back room, and now I'm meeting with ministers of defense and heads of state of various countries. IT is becoming that important to national strategy and national security. In 1995, after we received the accreditation from the American Council on Education, we started creating academic partnerships, and Patty Coopersmith was the lead in this for us. And one of the first ones we got was with Syracuse University. In fact, our relationship with the graduates of our programs going into master's degrees at Syracuse was so great that Syracuse actually opened a center focused on our students in the Washington, D.C. area. There are a number of students that wanted to go and receive their master's degree, so we were igniting a fire in these students to learn. And this was helping the federal government too, because they were learning about information technology and automated information systems. We would have open houses where we would invite different universities in to talk about their programs and try to get our students to attend their programs. The program grew from roughly the University of Maryland, the University campus was our second academic partnership. It later grew to 37 schools across the United States. Some very prestigious institutions were involved in this. In 1991, the Defense Acquisition University was formed, and this was a big deal for us for two reasons. They had Title X authority, which made hiring significantly easier. And that authority was extended to us because we were offering courses for the Defense Acquisition University. We received over $1 million roughly. We taught information technology courses and how IT was involved in acquisition and how you acquired automated systems. And this was an entirely different process, as I'd mentioned before, than acquiring major systems like aircraft carriers or airplanes or tanks or anything of that sort, which was run over a number of years. So we got this relationship with Defense Acquisition University, and we received an award at the time. Corporate universities were a big deal, and this is where the focus was on the educational institution adapting its courses to the workplace. And Defense Acquisition was also a corporate university. We were a corporate university in the area of IT and automated information systems. The biggest thing that ever happened to the college, very important to IT, was ITMRA, the Information Technology Management Reform Act of 1996, referred to as the Clinger-Cohen Bill. Joyce Franz, over in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Networks and Information Integration, worked with, once again, Danita McGarry, our key person on curriculum outreach. They worked on the various committees of implementing Clinger-Cohen. And it was worked out that the IRM college would be the one to offer certificate programs and courses within this area. Along with that came position authorizations and roughly $2 million. Now, we were now getting the money and resources that came with the transfer of DODC, plus we were getting the DAU money that was coming in for teaching and developing courses on information technology and acquisition. And now we were getting money for Clinger-Cohen and how to educate chief information officers. Things were about ready to skyrocket. The money that we had was given to the National Defense University to fulfill our missions, which were now growing. But our policy was coming from the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Networks and Information. At the time, it was actually ASD C4I, and Emmett Page was the leader. And when we started doing these types of things, particularly the CIO, Emmett was extremely excited and said, we need to keep building on this. At this time, we started building our labs. An extensive building of the labs came about at this time. The Sad news that happened here was in 1997, John Carabella passed away of a heart attack. John had been our leader and made these connections. Over the next 2 years, 97 to 99, I was the interim director, and then Admiral Jerry Smith was in. He was there for a little over a year, and then he went away, and I was the acting director. And then in 1999, General Chilcote uh, put a board together and selected me as the permanent director. I was the move at this time. It was a significant move because I'd been inside developing curriculum, building the departments working together along with Danita, improving the curriculum, adding curriculum, and now I had to become Mr. Outside. And some significant things, very significant things, happened under General Chilcote. Number one, he said, Bob, you've been a major part of ERMC, and now you also have added responsibility of being on my executive committee and helping the university. He said, number two, I want you to become with the Armed Forces Communication and Electronic Association, an association which had 31,000 members around the world and focused on the very things we were, bringing together academia, the federal government, and the private sector. So it was a marriage born in heaven, which I will talk a little bit about later. The next thing, General Chilcote wanted to go down to Duke University. And he'd had a relationship with the coach, Mike Krzyzewski, from his West Point days. And it was set up that we would go down there, and it was set up, and Mike helped us set up a relationship with Dr. John Gallagher. At the time, he was vice president for information technology at the university. Later, he was to work on their strategies. He was the executive for their corporate university outreach, which tied in to our corporate university status and the way we saw things. So what happened now, there was a major shift. There was a major shift in my focus, and there was a major shift in funding that went on too. I turned my attention to building out the labs, and we will put up a slide on the labs. But for years, we've been experimenting with virtual reality, with augmented reality, artificial intelligence, robotics. One story on the robotics area, which is a little off color, but I'll tell it. Dr. Steve Kanoda had developed a robot, and we had some Russian visitors in, a 3-star general. And we had the robot, and he was going to deliver a cup of coffee. Well, the robot's reach where he could handle things was roughly waist high. Well, you can picture what happened. He's coming in to deliver the cup of coffee to the Russian general, and he keeps going and doesn't stop right about just below waist high. So you can picture the calamity that went on there. We thought we created an international relationship. It's funny looking back at it. At the time, it wasn't so funny. Another thing, the university would take visitors, international visitors, private sector visitors, and the NDU Foundation would sponsor these folks. And they would take them around, and each of the institutions, National, ICAF, in our college, would have them for a half hour or so. Well, we had Chinese 3-stars coming in one time, and I had my 30 minutes, and they were still with me 3 hours later. So we learned from them what the Chinese were looking at and what they were doing. And it was really amazing. We have pictures of these people sitting in our technology labs, doing stuff, putting on helmets, looking at virtual reality, augmented reality. It was really fascinating watching the evolution of this. Another thing that became very big and important to us was we established relationships with the Gartner Group. And the Gartner Group was the group that takes a look at all technologies that are emerging and gives their status. They had what they called the the evolution or the hyper chain of it, from getting hyped to falling into the trough of disillusionment to becoming part of the mainstream of technology. And we followed these very closely, and I went to their conferences and I talked to their experts. And I had their experts in. We had an agreement with them. We had a contract actually where their top people would come in and speak to our classes. Also, the Consumer Electronics Convention was getting big, and it was to the point that it was 120 to 150,000 people a year that attended this. And the demonstrations that were put on, your bigger companies, Intel, Microsoft, they would have labs and demos that they put on the conference floor in Las Vegas that cost $1 million to $3 million. They were spectacular. And we learned a lot about the new technologies, and I picked up a number of speakers from going to these events. The next important event in the college was the Chief Financial Officer Academy. Now, when I came in 1999 and became the director of the college, I had to replace myself as dean to get somebody inside, and I brought in Dr. Linda McDaniel. Linda and I had been colleagues. She was also a fellow with the American Council on Education in the same class that I was in back in 1989-90, and I hadn't lost this relationship, and she was ideal. She brought a professionalism, a focus on e-portfolios for renewals, focus on having the faculty publicize their works and their understandings and to do research. In other words, anything you can think of in the professional realm, she was the one coming out of the academic community where she had been an associate dean of a college and brought the best aspects of higher education into the college. We had developed the programs and done that, so when she came in, she polished it and took it to a new level. And that was outstanding. And one of the things she got involved with is she developed a relationship with Linda Combs over in OMB. The financial people had been taking a look, and they wanted to have an academy. Like, okay, we had the CIO program. They wanted a Chief Financial Officer Academy. And Tina Jonas was the Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller. And Tina really wanted an academy. Well, what happened? I started working with, because of Linda McDaniel's experience in doing some projects with them. Danny Werfel was the controller over at OMB. Well, Danny fell in with us seeing what we were doing, and we put two and two together, and we discovered with a few minor, adding some courses here and there, the Chief Financial Officer Academy could coexist with our CIO Academy, or programs, if you will. And they would just add the Chief Financial Officer specialties to the other things that we were teaching, which any leader really needed to know. So I got General Fran Wilson, who is now the president of National Defense University, and I think this was around 2008. We had a meeting with Danny Werfel and Tina Jonas, and the deal was struck, and we became the Chief Financial Officer Academy. And once again, more money. So now we have the DODC money in people, we have the DAU people in money, we have the large one, the Klinger-Cohen CIO, big money, and now we have Chief Information Officer money. At the same time, we're adding these labs, as I mentioned earlier. And the labs, we had corporations that were not only giving us speakers and an occasional student, but they were also providing technology for our labs at no cost to us. Because my sales pitch was, hey, we have a lot of senior executives, and by now we're filling roughly 3,000 seats a year through our different courses. And the people that are filling those seats are mid-level to senior executives who have buying power and responsibility for looking at the latest, greatest technologies to bring them in. So this became a big marketing effort of ours, in addition to some others. I want to talk now in 2005, something else very, very critical happened. Uh, we had established relationships with the Joint Staff and with J6, which was responsible for systems. And we now had a relationship with the Defense Information Systems Agency. And this was brought about through John Grimes, who was the Assistant Secretary of Defense, and it was now called Networks and Information Integration. And John was in that position from 2005 to 2009. And he was probably one of the strongest advocates for what we did. John and I met at an ERMC Alumni Association meeting, and we started comparing notes. He'd done work and had established bilateral relationships with Romania and with Singapore and with other countries, and come to find out, I told him, hey, we were teaching courses in Romania, and we'd done some work helping develop an academy, and we did some work in Bulgaria, and we were teaching in Sweden. And John said, wow, he said, I'd like you to go out and really put a press on with different institutions. And he told me where to go. He said, I want you to go out to these places. I want you to go to Microsoft, Amazon, Google. We've been to Cisco. He said, VMware, Tibco. And you will learn a number of things, and I'd like you to bring those back to the college and put them into the labs which you've developed. And by now we have about 11 different labs that we've developed. So we were building on what John wanted us to do. One thing John did, and very clear in my mind, one time I was talking to him about, we had some inquiries from Brazil to visit us. And he said, look, I'd like you to go to Brazil. I'm good friends with the Minister of Defense. And while I was there, he sat down and he dictated a letter to the Minister of Defense and arranged for me to go over there with Dr. Jamal. And we met private meetings with the 4-stars that were head of their services, and a private meeting with the Minister of Defense. And I walked into a big hall that they were having a large kind of a gala meeting to kick off a large conference over there. And the sea parted, and he says, Bob, I'm glad you're here, and I want you to meet all my people. And once again, it wasn't me, it was the fact that John Grimes had made that introduction. And John was this way all around the world. And we were later do a number of things, and it would lead to what literally became a branding, a rebranding of the college and an international outreach that we hadn't even imagined before. We'd done a number of things of teaching in other places. We'd had a team go to Iraq, as I mentioned, Sweden, but this was to go to a whole new level. And at this time, we had a new president coming in. Anne Rondeau came in the summer of 2009. And Anne was very forward-looking, and she had a tasking she put out to the university saying, I want you to partner. Partnering was the big word in the lexicon of the day. Partnering was important. You can leverage yourself by partnering. Focus on information assurance. Focus on working with other countries, working internationally. Well, wow, these are all the things that we had been doing, but she was to push it to an all new level. Let me go back to 1998 and fill in something I'd forgotten. There was a PPD, program budget decision, that came out, and it focused on national security and protecting the critical infrastructure protection. This would later be turned into the Center of Academic Assurance for Information Assurance. The purpose of this was to encourage colleges and universities to offer education that would focus on the new emerging area of cybersecurity and how to protect the old systems. the critical infrastructure protection, the dams, the railways, the airways. All these systems were put in years ago, and they really had no protection in them. The importance of this to the college is it was a new field of information that had to be dealt with. Cybersecurity, that term was not even really big at the time. And the importance to the college is we had expertise in that area. But also, if you were certified a center of academic excellence, you could receive information assurance scholarship students. And the iCollege was actually certified. We had to map our curriculum to very specific objectives, which were developed by the National Security Agency, and later it was a combination of National Security Agency and Department of Homeland Security. And then this is another thing that brought us money, and it brought us more students. At the same time, we were going out and we were doing other things. We were going out to the different commands. We went out to NATO. We went out to CENTCOM. We went out to STRATCOM, the Transformation Command. We were literally everywhere that people needed anything to do with information, and information was exploding. One of the things we did, and one of the things I'd wanted for a long time is if you watch CNN, they had a board that would come up and show things happening all over the world. So we put in a crisis management center, and literally we showed people how these crisis boards work. And we had feeds that were coming in from different countries showing real time things that were going on, traffic patterns in London, bridges that might be caught by the SCADA, Supervisory Control Automated Data Systems. And we had labs that showed how these things could be disrupted. Another thing that we decided to do is we wanted to reach out, and we had our 20th anniversary. And one of the big things that we did, this was held at National Harbor. It was a grand gala. But to me, it was a marketing event. There were over 400 people that came in, and we brought in our academic partners, our government partners, industry, and it was really incredible. And this created excitement. The same reason that we used graduations of all our programs to create excitement and to let managers know what was going on so more people would come. We were crossing boundaries now. We were going into areas we'd never been in before. Telework was becoming big. And of course, we could do that because back in the mid to late 90s, we'd been developing distance learning. And we worked agreements with the EPA, for example. Net-centric warfare became good, and the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Cartwright, came over and taught in Kathy Downs' class. Now, the big thing we did, and this was in 2010, we started to do regional collaboration conferences. And the first one of these was in Singapore. And we worked with the head of the civil service over there, and we worked with the National University of Singapore that co-sponsored the program. And we had over 20 nations that attended this. And we titled it Regional Collaboration in Cybersecurity, Securing the Cloud, the Web, and Virtual Networks. And we had a number of sponsors, TIBCO, VMware, because what we found out, and it was a very interesting discovery. Conferences held internationally were usually put on, and if Cisco put it on, it was about Cisco. And if Microsoft put it on, the answer was Microsoft. We were a neutral organization. In other words, we could focus on the academic part of things, but bring in the technical aspects to it. And we didn't have a dog in the fight. We could be neutral and present things. And this was the first of our outreach efforts. This was to be followed by a conference in Dubai, which was a huge step forward going into the Middle East, where we were moving a lot of troops at the time. And we developed what I would refer to as a new vision. We started thinking about ourselves as the global hub for educating, connecting, and informing information age leaders. So we had always been educated, and we'd been informing through having different discussions and conferences, but we really had never focused on connecting people. But if we could bring information age leaders together in a conference to share common concerns, common solutions, this would be huge, and that's what we were doing. We were later to expand this and conduct an international conference in Bangkok. We were to do a conference in London, and we were to do a second conference in Singapore in 2012. So we were living the new vision. And this is when Anne Rondeau started calling us the iCollege. And the iCollege to us meant innovation, intelligence, but the big three were interagency, industry, and international. Let's bring these groups in. And this fit right in with the Secretary of Defense, who was Gates at the time, and he had the concept, and he and Rumsfeld were working on soft power. In other words, if you develop friends and relationships with nations, they can help you out in time of need. You just can't go to them when you need them. You need to develop these relationships and strong things. So we were a big part of that. Simultaneously, we were working on putting out articles. Dr. McDaniel had encouraged the faculty, and they were turning out articles. There were over 150 articles, attending conferences, and hosting conferences. We hosted, when Anne Rondeau came in, we hosted the first conference in the new conference hall, and we had, I guess it was close to 500 people in it, and it was on cloud computing. And Vivek Kundra, the federal CIO, the first federal CIO, who'd become a friend of mine, as I had mentioned earlier, I believe, we had him in to speak, and he drew a large part of the crowd. Dave Winograd, who was the Deputy Chief Information Officer, and he was acting for a while when Mr. Grimes had retired, and Dave was a huge sponsor of what we were doing and what we needed to do. And he also was head of the Federal CIO Council. So DOD being the big dog in the room, having the biggest budget. Anyway, we started, Dr. McDaniel had been working on preparing for a master's degree program. And we had the coursework ready, and the team from the Department of Education came in. And we got them together in a conference room to have lunch, and I invited two speakers to join us that were outside of the faculty. One was Mr. Grimes, and two was Steve Cooper. John Grimes stood up and talked about how important we were, how the Chief Information Act was at the center of bringing and elevating the role of the Chief Information Officer in DOD and the importance of this. And it was not lost on the audience. And then Steve Cooper spoke. And Steve had been the Chief Information Officer, the first one in Department of Homeland Security when the 22 organizations were formed. He'd been the CIO in the Red Cross. He'd been the CIO in the Federal Aviation in one segment of their operation. And he was very well known. And Steve stood up and said, look, I speak at a lot of universities. I'm on the faculty at a lot of universities. But when I want to learn something, I come to the Information College. Wow, you could just see the look on the people's faces. I knew at that point in time we were going to get degree granting authority. What was to follow is Admiral Rondeau and I had to testify before the Department of Education, and then we received the credit in late December of 2010, we got the word that we were going to be allowed to grant a master's degree. And this was a huge step forward because this is what our students wanted. It was very delicate, though, because we also wanted to maintain our academic partnerships and we didn't want to be competing with them. So a lot of the schools, the public universities, private universities, were specializing in areas. So as it turned out, there really wasn't a conflict in that area. Now, this also brought more money with it. As we're bringing people in, we're once again getting more money from the interagency in particular. So we felt good about this and things were going well. We were integrating all the things that we were doing. We traveled out as we had been asked. We started working with NASA. One of the areas that we were asked to do, we got tied in with NOAA, and they were doing avatars and virtual conferences and things of this sort. So we became very, very big in virtual worlds, and Dr. Paulette Robinson led that effort. We were one of the biggest in the country. We had the CI Center up now, and this was Creative Innovation Center. And this was to bring feeds, whiteboards, and all kinds of things where faculty and students could come together, brainstorm, classes were taught in there, and it was really unique. And this was done, we'd always wanted to do it, but once again, it was the sponsorship of Dave Winograd, who was the Deputy DoD CIO at the time. And he really pushed us to come up with a classroom of the future and what it would look like and what we could do. So it created interactions and tied into the internet, brought intelligence into it, it brought TV into it. Telepresence became a big thing that we were developing. At the same time, we were connecting with Colonel retired Charlton, who ran the International Fellows Program at National Defense University. And when we did our conferences at Bangkok and the United Emirates, we partnered with John because National Defense University had, since the late 90s, actually the mid-90s, they had international fellows coming in. Well, these people had risen to significant positions in their institutions, in their countries. And these people were valuable alumni, which, once again, soft power were important to the university. Well, when we did these conferences, we tied in with John, and he had a pre-conference tied into ours where people, alumni of the International Fellows Program across NDU, graduates of National College and the Eisenhower School could come and attend our conference. And I would speak to them and give them a view on what was happening in information technology and systems, what was going on in cyber, critical infrastructure protection, and we would offer advice in different areas. Our cyber department was led by Gil Duvall at this time. It had evolved under Mary Politis. She had been a big actor along with Danita McGarry in getting the Center of Academic Excellence in Information Assurance up and running and getting the college recognized. But we were making this cyber department now. And the two key players after Mary, Gil Duvall took that over along with Dr. John Saunders, who had been with the institution, with the college since it was formed. And he actually used to work at Dodsey and do neural networks and things of that sort. We started building this and we started getting visitors. We worked with Army Cyber Command. Lieutenant General Red Hernandez was just coming in to start the Army Cyber Command. And he and his staff came over and we helped them point out some certain areas. The U.S. Cyber Command was just getting up and running. And we worked with the leadership there and in our labs. They sent a number of their early students over through our labs. And this was very important connection because we looked at what they were looking at the time. They were combined with NSA, so we're finding out what the deep concerns are. which tied in of being a center of academic excellence. At the same time, we're working at NIST, working with the NIST people. We had people on every CIO committee that existed, and we were heavily involved with the Federal Chief Financial Officer through our program with their committees. So you can see we were very well connected. We were connected with GSA. You name an agency, and we had a faculty member or staff member working with them. In a way, we were singularly unique in a number of different areas of programs where we offered degrees, but nobody else offered these degrees. Colleges were picking up on this, but here comes the problem. In 2012, it started out that budgeting was starting to be, getting money was becoming a problem in DoD. Now, we were pretty solid, but the university, we had the Department of Defense, the CIO's office, is our sponsor. And when John Grimes left and Dave Winograd left, Terry Takai was brought in. Now, Terry Takai was well thought of. She'd been the CIO in California under Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Terry came in, but Terry did not know the federal government. And in all honesty, the DOD's office, the CIO office, the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Networks and Information Integration, Joyce France, had helped maintain our budget and our personnel. Joyce also retired. So now we are left with a new CIO who didn't understand our underpinnings and was no longer in charge of our budget and did not know that without her backing, we were at the mercy of J7, who was in DOD, who were doing cutting. And our program started getting cut. At the same time, there'd been a change in administration, and then the view on soft power was rapidly going away. The GSA held a conference in Las Vegas, and a lot of money was spent unnecessarily, and it became a big front page scandal. And this colored everything that went on, and it had bad ramifications for everybody, but it specifically hit our outreach program. We were basically told by DOD that you would stop doing these types of things, that it was not necessary to do conferences. Well, at the same time, National War College and National ICAF were coming under budgetary pressures, and the NDU started looking at things, and the Joint Staff was pressuring NDU to cut back and to cut back any program that wasn't joint professional military education. Well, by definition, we were not joint professional military education. In 1986, when Goldwater Nichols came in, and the chairman, it created the position of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and it created the Joint Specialty Officer Program. Well, Joint Specialty Officers were supposed to have a certain amount of education in a joint school. Remember that, in a joint school. The definition of a joint school, they kind of took it from Armed Forces Staff College, where they had a mix of students from all services, a very equal mix, and a mix of faculty from the services, and a portion, and listen to this, a portion of the curriculum was considered joint. That portion was later defined, the Joint Staff charged NDU with coming up with what was joint education. At the time, that responsibility and tasking came down to me. So what would we do with this? Well, I sat down with Roy Stafford, who was the president or the dean of faculty at the National War College, and Roy came up with the curriculum, or what he considered was joint. It was a portion of the curriculum. The industrial college did not participate by choice in this. We forwarded that to what we thought should be in a joint curriculum. At the time, it was not stated that this would become the joint curriculum. At the same time, they wanted to know, how can we tell if a school's joint? Because if you needed to get the identifier of a joint specialty officer, like I said, you had to have joint PME and you had to have a joint assignment. So every school now wanted to be considered a joint curriculum. So anyway, we had to come up with something, and the joint staff asked us what to do. And having accreditation experience, I said, why don't we create an organization that accredits these schools? Therefore, they came up with the PAGE, the Program to Accredit Joint Education. And I got to serve on the first team, and we went to the Defense Intelligence College. And the Defense Intelligence College was an incredible school. It did everything it should do. However, to me, the criteria was a certain curriculum that you had to have. And that school did not have it. And I would not be wanting to hire somebody as a joint specialty officer that had super intelligence, but not joint. So anyway, this is where the discrepancy came in, and I voted against it. I was the only one on the team that voted against it. I was never asked to be on another team after that. Well, this is the exact problem that NDU got into, because they looked at the iCollege, which had been named by Admiral Rondo after looking at all we did, and back to the interagency, the international, the industry, the innovation, and iPod and iPhone and everything were big terms. She anointed us as the iCollege. At the same time, after we got the degree granting, she changed the title, my title, from director to chancellor, because she said, we have a lot of directors at NDU, but Bob, for a number of years now, since the late 90s, the IRM college, the iCollege, has been the largest student body when we count seats. So consequently, I need to change your title, and you're not a general, so I think chancellor is the word that we will use. So I became the chancellor, and I should have mentioned this earlier. That had a big effect on my international travels and international relations, because the word chancellor carries a lot more power than the word director. So anyway, the university is coming under tremendous pressure to cut jobs and to reduce budget. And the IRM college became the bill payer. Now, something very interesting happened. As things were getting worse, good news arrived in August of 2013. The Pell Center for International Relations and Public Policy, they had an author that came out and did a study, Francisca Spitaleri. She did a study of the schools. The title of the study was Report on Joint Professional Military Education Initiatives in the Age of Cyber Threats. And the National Defense University iCollege came out far ahead of any other of the senior service colleges, beating out the Naval War College, the Air War College, and the Army War College in particular. But it also, the study further went on and showed that the NDU iCollege was equivalent to the best colleges in the United States in cyber education. It was equivalent to the Stanfords and the Georgetowns. At the same time, other exciting things were happening. The iCollege was the largest center of academic excellence in information assurance, is certified by the National Security Agency, and now Homeland Security was part of that. We produced more graduates than any other program in the United States. We were the best. Mary Politis had started this and got it going. Danita McGarry was heavily involved working with NSA, and also Dan Ryan and later Gil Duval were mapping the competencies that NSA said were needed to deal with the cyber threat to the United States. We were now working with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. We were working with the National Institute of Cyber Education, which fell under NIST. We got involved with the Information Assurance Scholarship Program, and this brought us more students and more money. That was under the Center of Academic Excellence program. We were tied in to the Software Engineering Institute and Paul Nielsen and what they were doing in software. Software was becoming huge. Software would later become the basis for everything that was going on. Every program was software based, and therefore it had to be secure. And there were a number of key players that we dealt with, and this is where we will gain policy views on different issues, what the concerns were, and where the world was moving, where the private sector was going, and what other countries were doing. Key players included people like Steve Kellman from Harvard, who was a nationally renowned speaker across a broad range of subjects that hit our degree programs. Mark Foreman, who was at OMB, and he later moved over to KPMG, and he helped us get a service chair from KPMG. This is for the Financial Officer Academy program. We had Alvin Berman, who was OSD policy and an expert in program acquisition and program policy management across DoD. Karen Evans, who is the CIO, she was chairman of the Federal CIO Council, and she was a heavy supporter of the school. We were dealing with thought leaders and doers. I was selected in a four-man team to go with General Jones, and he was the national security advisor to the president at the time. And we went over to China, and we were dealing with confidence building measures between the two countries. During one of the side conferences, one thing that came up, or a couple, actually it was two of the Chinese generals, challenged me. They said, hey, you just graduated 3 Taiwanese officers. And I thought, holy cow, that only happened 3 weeks ago. These guys are tracking what we are doing. And that tells me that they're concerned about what we're doing, and they think that we're on top of things. Well, anyway, I responded. I said, yes, we did. They were very good officers, and we talked about the possibility of bringing Chinese officers over in an exchange program. And I told them, by the way, the three Taiwanese officers all graduated as distinguished graduates. We worked with the CIO in the United Kingdom, and he was dealing with information as it affected the financial systems and how it would affect the whole economy of the UK, and he gave us some great insights. We had the cyber chief, Prince Nayef from Saudi Arabia, who talked in our Dubai conference. And we had a number of different companies that came into that. Microsoft, VMware, Cisco, they all participated and supported us and helped bring in speakers. We dealt with Qatar and maritime security. We did a number of things, United Emirates, and spoke at a number of their conferences. I was on a panel, and I worked very closely with the leader of the Asia Pacific Center in doing conferences, in particular one 3-day conference that opened up the whole Asian continent to us and what their concerns were. Now, more to the point of information warfare, we brought in Jacques Vixu for our Singapore conference, and we were focusing on cloud computing, collaboration, those types of things. And Jacques Vixu was the Minister of Defense in Estonia, and that was the first country that experienced a cyber attack, the first one. And he had incredible viewpoints on how you had to partner, how you had to do these things ahead of time to be prepared for anything that happened this way. We also brought in the Deputy Minister of Defense from Georgia. And in 2008, Georgia was the first country to experience a kinetic attack matched up with the cyber attack. So in other words, the systems and everything were being attacked at the same time. There were land tanks and armored vehicles coming into to Georgia. We were learning firsthand what the issues were and how to deal with them. It was very fascinating. From all of this, we put together our cyber center. And it started early, but Mary Politis was involved in this, and I have to give the credit to Gil Duval and Dr. John Saunders. They had large efforts in SCADA and building these labs so students would get hand-on experience in these areas. I was a huge believer in labs because I was a biology undergraduate student, and I wouldn't have thought of learning about genetics or zoology or botany without hands-on lab experience. Donna Powers was very important in something we did. We took these labs to the conferences we went with us, a few select labs. And Donna was an unsung hero. She not only fought our budget battles with OSD, but she was responsible for trying to figure out how to ship these labs to both Singapore and Dubai and Bangkok. And this was a massive effort, and we had to deal with customs and processes and procedures, and she did an incredible job in this area. I want to mention Hopper Auditorium. Paul Gaffney, when he was president, talked to me and said, hey, is there anything that I can specifically do for you? And I said, well, I'd kind of like an auditorium dedicated to us. Well, he had me go look around, and I saw a Navy facility that was kind of an amphitheater. And I said, Paul, that's what I want. Well, Paul couldn't give me that size of a room, but he gave me a room, and we designated it Hopper Auditorium because we wanted the name after somebody that had a historical context with the university. And she had talked about the nanosecond. She had talked about, she had been a faculty member in the old DODSI, and she had really supported the development. Now, I want to mention this distributed learning again. In the late 90s, we were doing this, and Dr. Jay Alden was our leader in this area. Jay did a number of things, and at first he wasn't a believer, but it's unbelievable how somebody who is not a believer can become your strongest advocate. And he used to do demonstrations for the rest of the faculty. He did an amazing job in this area. And I felt distributed learning would become so important to the college with our explosion of programs that I dictated that any faculty member would not be renewed unless they had distributed learning capabilities, unless they could teach online. Well, to support these people, I said, look, I will help you. I will particularly help you the first time you have to do this. Now, how could I help them? What I did, I gave them a dedicated audiovisual support group to work with them. And this was very important because many of these people were really knowledgeable in their field, but they didn't have time to learn all the techniques and the different technologies that you needed for distributed learning. So we brought this off and brought it up. Rhonda Gross was very important in this. Mike Pillar led the effort, and he was very critical. And there were a number of other people that were in and out of the lab as far as faculty members there helping out. And this was incredibly important. The other thing I want to do is talk a little bit. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention on that, faculty members were given time and a half credit in teaching hours for doing DL because it actually required a lot more work than doing it in person. So all faculty members had to have X number of teaching hours. So by teaching DL and by giving them time and a half credit, this encouraged faculty also to go in that direction. The importance of the labs. The SCADA lab, we could show how Stuxnet was created, the Aramco attack. We had avatars, we had virtual reality, we experimented in artificial intelligence, augmented reality. And we had something back in the late 90s called Sylvie. And this was a personal administrative assistant. And we'd use this not only for demonstration in the classroom, but we'd also use it at conferences that we went to when we put out a booth and we were marketing our programs. But Sylvie could answer basic questions. That's long before these things came out in the commercial area. The lab development, in the early days, it was Dr. Steve Canode, Paul Flanagan, John Saunders, and Jim Looney was a big part of this. Now, I want to mention Jim Looney because he was an AV specialist who really focused on visualization and our marketing efforts. Marketing was huge. Now, Jim and Patty Coopersmith worked together. Patty handled the outreach, the international outreach, and as I mentioned earlier, I believe the partnership program with other institutions and later with NSA. Well, Jim Looney put all the materials together and he gave a real professional touch to these things. They looked extremely, extremely good. Well, all of this really put us on top of the world. I mean, we were now recognized nationally, we were recognized internationally, and if you remember, one of my tenets was gain national and international recognition. But we were definitely at the forefront of cyber education, and across the federal military school system we were known, as well as across the Department of Defense. We were gaining international recognition by the day. And then all of a sudden, it fell apart. Why did it fall apart? Well, quite simply, J7, headed by Lieutenant General Flynn, the Vice President and Acting President of NDU, Ambassador Nancy McEldowney, later Major General Greg Martin, who became the NDU president, and now CIO Terry Takai, basically didn't understand what we were doing and our importance, and their views, in my opinion, were clearly clouded by the drive of the Skelton Committee and by J7 to only do joint professional military education, which we were not by definition. What a terrible thing to use this national treasure that we had built over 20 difficult years, the relationships, the friendships we had in DoD, interagency, industry, across the world were stopped, literally stopped in their tracks. Labs were dismantled. The support group for distance learning was taken away. The Innovation Center was taken away. Slowly but surely, everything that we had built with reimbursable funds, which I will mention in closing in a minute. I want to talk about the great support that we had, that I personally had when I was the chancellor and dean. And this goes back, way back to Dwayne Andrews in the early 90s. Dwayne Andrews was the Assistant Secretary of Defense C4I. And then we had Emmett Page came in, followed by Art Money, followed by John Stenbott. And these gentlemen really supported and helped the college. In fact, they looked at it as their school and furthering their policies and what we needed in automated information system. John Grimes came in, and he also was a designated CIO, and he was the last confirmed person in this position. And John was a tremendous supporter. At the university level, going back to General Puste when the college was brought in, when DODC was brought in, through General Lawrence, Lieutenant General Hosmer, Admiral Baldwin, who actually selected me to be the dean over at the college, General Surgeon, who sponsored the School for Information Warfare and Strategy. We had General Rocky, who was very big into chaos theory, and that tied into information management big time. Lieutenant General Chilcote, who selected me to be the chancellor and got me going with AFCIA, a very important relationship which would prove very fruitful later. And to this day, I work work with them. Admiral Gaffney, who supported us funding-wise and helped us get Hopper Auditorium, through General Dunn, who really just supported anything we did in conferences and outreach and building programs. General Fran Wilson, who was with me and accompanied me and was part of adding the Chief Financial Officer Academy. And last but not least was Admiral Rondo, who was a tremendous supporter of our international outreach, soft power, partnering, and all the things that we were doing. General Martin came in, and I don't think General Martin had a grasp of where we fit in the universe and why we were important as we were. Now, the last thing that I want to go through, and if you follow along with me, it's following the trail of money. And I think this is important for a number of reasons. It tells you where the money came from and the fact that we did not take it from the university. It was not a zero-sum game. These were reimbursables in many cases, and some were permanent. Dodsey comes over, people and money. Then we have the Cindy Kendall memo telling us what to do, and there was some more money that came with that. Then there was the agreement with Defense Acquisition University, and that brought in over $1 million, and we taught courses I mentioned earlier. Then there was the Information Technology Management Reform Act, or Klinger-Cohen. That brought over $2 million so we could hire more people. The CFO Academy came in. Once again, more money, more people. We went from there, and in the beginning, we started bringing in industry. And I think I'd mentioned it earlier, GTE, and we later got up to 11 industry chairs at various times. And this also brought technology in. I figured at one time we had over $6 million worth of audio-visual equipment, lab equipment. It was amazing the loans and support that people gave us. And we got students from international, and these people, they were paying. So in the bottom line, we were living on partial reimbursables, and that allowed us to do all the extra things. And I think this is the thing that I know J7, General Flynn, and Admiral McEldowney did not understand. Reimbursable people, faculty, were signed to contracts, and their contracts specified that if reimbursable money went away, they would go away. They could not continue to be hired. So consequently, if the budget came down, we could scale back. But what happened, General Flynn was hammering home the fact that reimbursable wasn't good because you'll hire these people and you'll keep them and take it out of the NDU budget. Well, we never took anything out of the NDU budget, ever, except for basic support. In other words, electric, water, space, which was not insignificant, but it was certainly covered for what we had. But we became literally the bill payer. I had 85 faculty, not including the chairs that I had from industry, not including the interagency chairs. We had a number of people that were supporting what had become internationally recognized as a leader in cyber education, cyber leadership. And I want to differentiate. Cyber leadership is not about just technology. It's about how you be a senior or intermediate leader with all these cyber responsibilities. I want to end by saying that the past 22 years working with the IRM College and later what turned in to be called the iCollege has been the most rewarding and self-satisfying job and most challenging job that I ever had or ever could wish to have. Working with the people I work with around the world, within the federal government, the private sector, the faculty, the staff, was an incredibly rewarding experience which I would not trade for anything. And it's my wish that the college could somehow start taking the steps to rebuild what we lost back in 2013, the end of 2013, the beginning of 2014, because that was the turning point from where we want to be known internationally to dropping back to the state that it is now with roughly 100 to 200 students a year. At our peaks, we were running over 3,000 student seats a year. We were the largest college at the National Defense University. Thank you for listening to me, and I wish you all well.